1147, 1202, 1212, 1217. Look at these numbers. What connects them? At first glance, they're just years, but in the history of the medieval world, they represent something far darker. These are the starting dates of crusades that failed. Some ended in mere retreat. Others turned into outright catastrophes, vanishing into the sands of the East without ever reaching their goal. But amidst this trail of broken vows, lost armies, and shattered dreams, one campaign stands alone, one exception to the rule: the First Crusade. Launched in 1096, it was the only one that actually achieved its ultimate objective. So we have to ask, why? Why was the First Crusade the only one that succeeded? How did a disorganized collection of European knights and peasants manage to march thousands of miles, conquer hostile territory, and capture Jerusalem? To understand this miracle, we must look back to the end of the 11th century, a time when the world was on the brink of collision. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in a council chamber. In 1095, Pope Urban II stood before the Council of Clermont in France. He issued a call to arms, but this was not just about war, it was about salvation. The Byzantine Emperor Alexius I Komnenos had sent envoys to the west, begging for mercenaries to help fight off the Seljuk Turks. The Turks had taken over much of Anatolia and threatened Constantinople itself. More importantly for the common people, they had made pilgrimage to the Holy Land dangerous, sometimes impossible. Urban II saw an opportunity. He promised something unprecedented: the remission of sins. For those who took the cross and died in the effort, heaven was guaranteed. This spiritual incentive turned a military campaign into an armed pilgrimage. It was a fusion of faith and steel that would propel thousands across Europe. However, the first wave was a disaster. Before the main armies of knights could assemble, a charismatic preacher named Peter the Hermit rallied a mob of peasants and minor knights. This was the People's Crusade. Lacking supplies, discipline, or military strategy, they marched into Hungary and Byzantium, looting as they went. When they finally crossed into Asia Minor, they were annihilated by the Turks at Civita. This failure taught the Europeans a harsh lesson. Faith alone was not enough. Success would require organization, heavy cavalry, and siege engineering. The true crusade was yet to begin. In 1096, the real force departed. Led by princes like Godfrey of Bouillon, Bohemond of Taranto, and Raymond of Toulouse, these armies were formidable. They traveled separately, converging on Constantinople. Alexius I was wary. These Westerners were unpredictable. He forced their leaders to swear an oath. Any land they conquered that formerly belonged to Byzantium would be returned to the empire. In exchange, he provided guides, supplies, and military support. This alliance was crucial. The Byzantine navy helped transport troops, and their engineers assisted in the first major siege at Nicaea. Without this logistical backbone, the crusade might have stalled before it truly began. The march through Anatolia was a nightmare of heat and harassment. At the Battle of Dorylaeum, the Crusaders were nearly surrounded by the swift horse archers of the Seljuk Sultan Kilish Arslan. They formed a defensive circle protecting their infantry and non-combatants until reinforcements arrived. It was a victory of heavy armor over mobility. But the true test came at Antioch. The city was massive, with formidable walls. The Crusaders laid siege for 8 months. They suffered starvation, disease, and desertion. Morale plummeted. It was only the discovery of the Holy Lands, the spear that pierced Christ's side, that reignited their spirit. Believing God was on their side, they stormed the city in a desperate assault, miraculously capturing it just as Muslim relief army arrived. Then they had to defend the city they had just taken, winning another unlikely victory. So why did they succeed where others failed? The primary reason lies in the political landscape of the Middle East. The Muslim world was deeply fractured. The Seljuk Turks, who were Sunni, had recently taken power from the Shia Fatimid Caliphate in Cairo. There was no unified Muslim front. The Seljuks of Syria and Iraq were often fighting each other for dominance rather than uniting against the invaders. When the Crusaders arrived, they were seen by some local emirs as just another variable in their local power struggles, not an existential threat. This disunity allowed the Crusaders to defeat enemies piecemeal. They never faced a combined army of the entire Islamic world during the First Crusade. Furthermore, the Crusaders possessed a unique combination of motivation and technology. Their religious fervor was at its peak. They believed they were walking in the footsteps of Christ. This made them incredibly resilient in the face of starvation and death. Militarily, they brought the European heavy cavalry charge, which could break infantry lines, and they adapted quickly to siege warfare. They built castles as they advanced, securing their supply lines. Unlike later crusades, which were often hampered by conflicting political agendas between kings and popes, the First Crusade had a singular focus: Jerusalem. There was no king leading them, only princes, which ironically reduced political infighting during the march. In June 1099, the Crusaders reached Jerusalem. The city was now held by the Fatimids, who had recently recaptured it from the Seljuks. The Crusaders built siege towers and battered the walls. On July 15th, the walls were breached. What followed was a massacre. Contemporary chronicles describe blood flowing in the streets. While modern historians debate the exact numbers, the psychological impact was clear. The Crusaders had achieved their goal. Godfrey of Bouillon was elected as the first ruler of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. They had done the impossible. They had carved out a Christian state in the heart of the Muslim world. But this success sowed the seeds of future failure. The establishment of the Crusader states created a permanent target. The Muslim world eventually began to unify under leaders like Zengi and Saladin, realizing that the Franks were not leaving. Later crusades failed because they faced a unified enemy, lacked the element of surprise, and were often diverted by political interests, such as the Fourth Crusade sacking Constantinople instead of fighting Muslims. The First Crusade was a perfect storm of timing, motivation, and enemy weakness that would never be replicated. The First Crusade remains one of the most complex events in human history. It was a story of faith, brutality, survival, and geopolitical chance. It changed the relationship between the East and West forever. So the next time you look at a map of the medieval world, remember, that small strip of Christian territory on the coast was there because thousands of people marched across the world, driven by a belief that they could not fail. And for one brief moment in history, they were right. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this historical deep dive, please like and subscribe for more journeys into the past. See you in the next video.